If you've seen the title of this video, you obviously know what game I'm going to talk about. It's no secret that Megaman X6 is considered one of the worst games for the X series. There are a lot of resources all over the internet that showcase how broken the game can be. Guides emphasize things that you need to learn and take note of, while gameplay videos and reviews visually show us what is broken in the game. You might be wondering then, why am I adding to this vast resource online? Well, admittedly, I regrettably do have some emotional attachment to this game. God, I hope I'm not developing Stockholm Syndrome. It's going to be the worst. I know that talking about this game is similar to beating a dead horse, but honestly, I want to have a kick on said horse and leave a huge footprint while I'm at it. On a more serious note though, I think those resources show the game from a player's perspective. Now, I'm not saying it's a bad thing. More often than not, a player's perspective has been a driving force in deciding if a game is worth anyone's time. So instead of doing that, I want to approach this from a game design perspective and hopefully be able to explain what is considered good game design and what did Megaman X6 do wrong. Now, I'm not the end-all be-all of game development or game designing, so please feel free to correct me if I do say something wrong. Also, please feel free to share your own insights on game design, as I want this to be a learning experience for everyone involved. Just a few more things if you don't mind. Most of the footage here is my playthroughs with the Ultimate Armor X and Black Zero. Why? Just so I can further prove the point that the game is really challenging and nearly broken with the base forms. Look, I wanted to have an easy time getting footage and I can't be asked to do base form playthroughs of this game anymore. I'm not going to touch this game again unless I want to torture myself for some reason, if someone pays me a huge amount of money, or for charity. Without further ado, this is the many inconsistencies of Megaman X6. Now, in my opinion, the box art or game cover is a part of game development. Technically, this falls under game design art, but nonetheless, this is an important aspect of your game. The game cover, box art, and manual should be able to properly communicate what the player should expect before they even play the game. Does this mean that the first inconsistency of X6 is in the game cover? Funnily enough, yeah. I would make a joke of how too good X6 did this, but if anything, it's just a bit ironic. Also, I'm saying that even before you get to play X6, there is already a weird inconsistency that players can experience. What I'll show you on the screen is the US case for Megaman X6, which I got from the PlayStation database. As you can see, there really isn't anything bad about the cover. If anything, it's a product of the time. Now, I want to specifically focus on this, the inside of the case where it says 0 is missing. Let's move on to the Japanese case, which I own. As you can tell, it's vastly different from the US one, especially the inside. What I found funny is that in the Japanese case, there's already something here which tells us that hints Zero as a playable character. I mean, who is the only character in the X series whose main color is red? Isn't it Zero? What about the manual? Oh look, it's plastered with silhouettes of Zero. There's even a 1-up sprite for Zero, and I'm pretty sure that's Zero, because last time I checked, that was also the 1-up sprite for X4 and X5. Honestly, at this point, I'm aware that I'm just nitpicking, but I honestly find this thing hilarious. I find it weird that one of the main points of X6 was that Zero died from the previous game, and X has to go solo, yet we already have proof that that isn't going to be the case. My main point is that your game cover should be informative, but not too informative that it could possibly spoil major events in your game. You should still leave some stuff to the player and not think that they are just a bunch of idiots. Also, make sure your game art or covers don't immediately contradict one of the main plot points of your game. This could severely hamper, if not outright remove, the importance or the depth of your game's plot. Speaking of plot, let's talk about X6's story. Now, I'm aware that the creation of a story is its own can of worms. Story writing has its own do's and don'ts, basically what constitutes as a good plot and story writing. However, I think that the do's and don'ts of creating a story also applies to game design, especially if the story you're writing is, you guessed it, for a video game. You don't just approach it with if it's a good story, but you also have to approach it in the interactive dimension, as games are interactive media. I am talking about story presentation. There are times in video games that the plot on paper is great, but because it wasn't executed and communicated well, it falls really short to the point that the players don't even notice the story. In the case of X6, not only is the story arguably bad at best and questionable at worst, but the presentation itself, though better than X5, is still severely lacking. For those who don't know, X6 is a direct sequel to X5. This isn't like in some of the other X games wherein there was a good amount of time in between them. This also isn't the first time the X series has done this. X2 is a direct sequel of X1, and the main plot of X2 makes sense if you include the context and foundation of X1. X6 does it the wrong way. In X2, you had to put Zero back together because he sacrificed himself to save X in the previous game. X6 decided to disregard what happened near the ending and the ending of X5. For those who don't know, X5 has two endings. The good ending, wherein the space colony Eurasia was destroyed, they beat Sigma, Zero dies, and X still has Zero's saber weapon. The shot wherein X had Zero's saber was 3 years after the incident. Then you have the bad ending, where the colony wasn't stopped and severely damaged the Earth, Zero became a maverick and dies earlier than in the good ending, and after the fight with Sigma, X forgets Zero completely. So how did X6 disregard the endings? Well, for starters, X6 decided to combine the two endings instead of deciding which one to continue from. It isn't a good idea to do this because, as you can see, the two endings are nearly opposites. The only thing they have in common was Zero dies, but even then, they tell a different story of how Zero kicked the bucket. Why did anyone thought to just continue from the good ending, since another major gameplay point of X6 was X can use the Z-Saber. It would have been easier and less confusing for everyone. This is one of X6's main weak points in plot, continuity, and integrity. Because of the shaky foundations that X fans have pointed out time and time again, the plot of X6 can be taken seriously and is instead highly inconsequential in the grand scheme of things. Point is, if you are going to make a direct sequel of a game, then please, for the lack of a better term, get your facts straight. Don't just decide to compromise for everyone's sake. I know that multiple endings in video games is its own discussion, but there will be times where you have no choice but to choose an ending that makes sense to the direction you want to take a game's story. Now, some of you might say, I don't care about the plot of X games, I just played for the gameplay. And okay, sure, I am not going to fault you for that, but this game has plot. It decided to have plot. Therefore, we the players are allowed to criticize the existing plot. If you don't criticize the plot, then story writing for video games would not progress at a fast rate. We would have continued to have overly simple or stupidly convoluted ones that don't mean anything in the end. Okay, so I've just discussed that the start of X6 wasn't a good one. Maybe there's something salvageable from all of this. I mean, there are some games that have slow starts, but was able to keep pace and quality consistent for the rest of the game. Well, don't hold your breath because X6 decides to mess up the contents. Like I said earlier, X6's story is highly inconsequential in the grand scheme of things. If I were to compare it to something, it's like anime filler arcs. It's just there, it just happens. The story for X6 is 3 weeks after the Eurasia colony incident and focuses on this Reploid named Gate. Now, Gate was able to get a sample of Zero's DNA and from there created the Nightmare Phenomena. The Nightmare Phenomena was basically doing some really weird and dangerous stuff, which prompted the Maverick Hunters to check it out. Long story short, X had to fight Gate, and upon his defeat, mentioned that he brought back Sigma because he knew that there was a chance he was going to lose. Then X defeats Sigma, ending X6. If you can tell, the story is rather basic and not the good kind. For starters, the story is really bland. It's basically Gate created a nightmare phenomena, and that's that. There really wasn't any sort of gravity to the situation. Admittedly, this might be me being apathetic since X5's premise, though not the best of plots, at least emphasized to you the gravity of the situation. The nightmare phenomena, gameplay-wise, will not be discussed in this video, so I do apologize for that, but plot-wise, there is nothing about it. The only time it was shown was when the game decides to tell you that there is a nightmare phenomena and that Isaac and Gate have dispatched investigators to check it out. After that, nothing. There was no plot exposition on what it is, no story points that show how bad or good the nightmare phenomena is. Heck, there wasn't even any information about it in the story. It's like, it's just there. Look, in X5, yes, there technically was a subplot going on in the story, but at least the main point was the urgency of the Sigma virus and the currently crashing space colony. From the start of X5, we are alerted to how important of an issue it is that we stop this colony from crashing to the Earth at any means necessary. And that is why you have 8 bosses to fight. In X6, the nightmare phenomena was relegated to a gameplay gimmick. Here's the thing. If you're going to mention something in the story and make it seem a big deal, but not talk about it or show anything about it plot-wise, then why bring it up? It's more irritating in the case of the nightmare phenomena because it was immediately relegated as a gameplay gimmick. could have at least do a quick plot exposition that shows how the nightmare gimmick was really messing up parts of the world, or how it was turning some Reploids maverick. Now, I'm not saying that you should bring up anything in the plot that may be of useful information. I'm not saying that you should point out that X loves Kirby because if X picks up Kirby, he gets a power-up. What I'm trying to say is that if you bring up an important term or point of interest and then made it your game's main feature, then at least do some plot exposition. Do some heavy lifting in the storytelling department. Present to us why this nightmare thing is worth our damn time. What about the characters? Well, I want to talk about them in a separate section of this video, so I won't go too in depth yet. However, I do want to point out that the story presents us with 3 new characters, and funnily enough, they are the game's antagonists. We have Gate, Isaac, and Hymax. Then the rest of the cast are the characters from X5. Gate is supposed to be the big baddie for this game, the villain who is in the spotlight. The game does a very good job of selling it to us as well. The first cutscene when you start a new game shows us Gate's descent into madness. Then while playing the game, most of the cutscenes always show Gate either egging X on or just doing the whole villain exposition perspective. As I've stated earlier, after you beat Gate, Sigma hijacks the plot and becomes the final enemy. I know that in the context of X, this is supposed to be like the Megaman series where Dr. Wily is always the bad guy. But seriously, this just leaves a bad taste in the mouth. Why spend a good amount of the plot building up Gate, showing that he's the mastermind behind all of this, only to have Sigma appear out of nowhere to take the wheel from him? There was no presence of Sigma ever from the start of the game. Sigma has done nothing to deserve this spot. Now I know that this isn't the first game that does this. I also do admit that there might be a game out there that did this and it worked out in their favor. However, most of the time, this will just blindside your players. Let me give you an example. One of my favorite games, Final Fantasy IX. Near the end, you will fight the main antagonist, Kuja. Upon beating him, you suddenly get another boss fight. Is it with another form of Kuja? No. It's this thing called Narcon who decided to hijack the game in the last minute. This has honestly left a lot of players confused at the time, and even I think this was really stupid despite knowing the reasons behind this. Main point, don't try to pull a literary bait and switch. More often than not, this will just end up damaging the integrity of your characters and your story. Wait, Owl Guy, what about Isaac and Hymax? You only talked about Gate. Oh well, it's because those two are also highly inconsequential. Isaac is Gate's assistant, and Hymax is created by Gate. That is the height of their plot relevance in this game ever. No more, no less. I'll talk more about them when I discuss their characters, but let this be a warning of how bad of a position they are in. My main point in talking about the new characters is that in a story, if you're going to introduce them in the game, and decide to make them fully interactable characters, then give them some plot relevance. I know what I just said is common sense, but it seems like X6 doesn't have it. I understand that in most games, you have new characters. Heck, every game does that, especially in sequels. But at least they have the decency to give characters personality, to give them actual purpose in the story. They aren't just people you can fight or people you can group with. They aren't just a brick wall that happens to be in your way. They aren't supposed to be just cannon fodder that X takes out with a buster shot. As cheap as this sounds, at least make them a catalyst for something really important in the story. To end the plot section, let's talk about the endings of X6. If you've guessed that the endings are worthless, then you're right. Give yourself a gold star. It's really disappointing if the whole story is just one big showcase of inconsistency. There are 3 endings to X6. One where you never got Zero, one where you got Zero but fought Sigma as X, and one where Zero defeated Sigma. Regardless of which ending you choose to pursue, they mean nothing. Not a single thing. They don't successfully bring a conclusion to the story. There was no explanation of what this all means, like what does it mean now that Gate is defeated? What does it mean now that Sigma is yet again defeated? Why should I care now that those two are out of the picture? I'm not saying X6 should have gotten a good ending, nor am I saying that you should force your games to have good endings. What I'm trying to say is that, regardless of how you end the story, it really has to feel like a conclusion. Be a conclusion. In the case of X6, the reason why the conclusion doesn't feel like an ending, because as I've said, this story just happens. It feels like filler, therefore it significantly hampered the impact of the ending. If you're going to make an ending to a story, even if it will have a sequel, at least successfully try to close this chapter of the plot. Let's finally talk about the characters. As I mentioned earlier, there are 3 new characters for the game and everyone else from the cast of X5 has been retained. Now you might be thinking that having a huge cast of characters can be detrimental to a story, and in some cases it is. However, some video games have shown that this is doable and manageable, for the most part. For X6, it isn't a huge problem if some of the retained characters from the previous game didn't have a role to begin with. In X6, there are only 4 characters worth talking about and paying attention to. X because he's the main protagonist, Zero because surprise is back, Gate because he's the main antagonist, and Aelia because the writers decided to give her a bigger role through backstory. That's about it. Isaac and Hymax, like I said, side characters. They don't amount to anything in the story, and individually, they don't have anything to them. Isaac is an assistant of Gate, that's his whole stick. You don't see him say anything more than, "Yes, Master Gate," outside of his really out of place fanaticism for Zero. Even if you could call that word fanaticism his personality, first of all, it's pretty one-dimensional, and secondly, it doesn't mean anything. Hymax is another side character, but I'd like to claim that he has potential. That was thoroughly wasted. He appears immediately after you beat the intro boss, and he has screen presence. He was big, he was menacing, and he was literally tough. Sadly, this is the only time that the game showcases Hymax. From what I can tell, he is supposed to be this game's secondary dangerous character, outside of the main antagonist like Vile from X1. However, I believe it's an insult to compare Vile to Hymax because of what Hymax really lacks as a character: personality. At least when Vile's on the screen, he's kind of fun in a psychopathic maverick way. The way he talks and acts clearly shows that this is a Reploid that has technically gone to the deep end. Hymax, he's a brick wall, an obstacle that you have to defeat just cause he battles you at the start of the game, and that's all he is. He has no personality. He doesn't do a maniacal laugh, he doesn't try to annoy X with speeches of how amazing creator Gate is. His purpose is to battle you, if you ever cross his path, and that's about it. For someone who's supposed to be big and menacing, his screen presence leaves much to be desired. Also, just because it's a challenging fight gameplay-wise, doesn't excuse his lack of characterization plot-wise. The point, like I mentioned previously, is that if you're going to introduce new characters, regardless of which side they'll be, give them something that makes them an actual character. In the case of X6, because the characters are in league with the enemy, you can't hide the fact that they fall up short. It'll be hard to hide it, like putting dirt under the carpet. That's not to say that X6 did it right for the Maverick Hunters. Luckily, X and Zero didn't get changed, though I think this could be more of a subjective point that can be up for debate. Let's instead focus on the supporting characters that were introduced back in X5, and damn, they literally made them supporting characters. Let's start with Aelia, who luckily has more plot significance in this game than just being the new Hunter support. Basically, the game decided to give her a backstory and intertwine said backstory with Gate. Now that's good for 2 reasons. The first reason is that, in a way, you are advancing a character that existed before. Aelia sadly has nothing going for her back in X5. Admittedly, the existence of her backstory, though not that significant in the long run, at least moves her forward in X6 instead of just being Hunter support again. That's her job. That doesn't need to be her full character. The second reason is that it also progresses Gate as a character. Now we not only know what his present character is, but we also have information from the past that hopefully would be able to provide us context to his present character. And that's the key word, context. I don't think backstory context is bad, whether it's in story writing or character development. I think it's rather crucial in some cases. What could hinder it is how the backstory is given to us, which is what X6 really messed up. The Alien Gate backstory, you don't get it as a normal plot exposition. Instead, you have to meet very specific in-game requirements to be able to even catch a glimpse of it. Now you can say that this is a problem of plot presentation, which was the earlier section, and yes, you're right. But I think it not only damages the plot, but the characters themselves. Think of it this way. This is supposed to be crucial information about a character, but because they decide to make yourself a Rubik's Cube while your arms and legs are tied in a chair while you get tickled in the stomach every 30 seconds, well, this makes it not worth the hassle. Because you put character development behind a gameplay paywall, you successfully damage the supposed foundational integrity of a character. Point is, if this plot or character information is so damn crucial, just do plot exposition for it. What about her fellow supporting characters Cygnus and Douglas? Still literal supporting characters. Sigma's supposed to be the leader of the Maverick Hunters, but he doesn't do anything. We don't see him giving X and Zero orders outside of "Stop Gate, stop the nightmare phenomena," which were just a few lines of text that appears twice, by the way. I'd argue that he has more character and leader-like traits in X5 than in X6. Douglas? The same guy from before, and that's that. No more, no less. I admit that I might be nitpicking at this point and that this isn't necessarily X6's fault, but the game could have at least done something to remedy that situation, especially since this is a direct sequel to X5. The last character I want to talk about is Sigma, and he's probably the biggest offender even in the characters category. I already mentioned earlier about how it was stupid that the game's plot decided to suddenly insert him into the fray. As one of the familiar faces of the series, you'd think that Big Bad Sigma would have shown his face to show how much of a mastermind he is. He doesn't. Oh, maybe he'd show how much twisted he is and re-emphasize his disregard for life. He doesn't. Maybe he still has that imposing villain's presence since in the previous games, when he is on screen, he is on screen. You know. And this is why he's the biggest offender in the characters of X6. He already has an established personality. He already has the villain spot on lockdown, and yet X6 decides not to leverage any of it and tries to defend itself through plot context of the previous game. And don't get me started on his boss fight, which is a separate discussion for a separate video. Like I said earlier, it's as if the developers decided to put him in the game because of tradition, that Sigma is always the final boss fight. But by doing that, you don't make him a character anymore. You just made him into a reference. You made Sigma into a very meta reference to his own Mega Man series. You didn't improve or progress him as a character. If anything, you just regressed him. The sad thing is, this isn't the first time this has happened. Just look at Megaman X3 if you don't believe me. Anyways, the point is that if you know that your character has no reason to be in the game, then don't force it. If you do force this, people will just end up having more questions like, why is he here? Why is he able to be here? What the heck is letting him be here? And etc. This will break the integrity of the plot and the character that you've built up. And for the love of everything that is good in video game characters, please do not forget the history of your characters, what you've made them experience. Players aren't dumb. They will notice that your character is acting rather odd, if not fully out of character. The last section I want to bring up for this video, as a way to open up the discussion for gameplay mechanics for the upcoming videos, is the X armors. Megaman X has 4 armors. Technically 3 if you don't count the ultimate armor, since you can only get it by a cheat code. For the purpose of this video, we will include the ultimate armor. Going back, from the 4 armors, 2 of them are from the previous games, while the remaining 2 are the new ones X introduces. We have the Falcon armor, the ultimate armor, the blade armor, and the shadow armor. Now, regardless of whatever armor you decide to carry into the stages, I want to bring this up now. The game, for some reason, wasn't designed to be comfortably played as X. When I say comfortably, I'm not saying the game should be a breeze. Instead, I'm pertaining to how I can finish the game as X without needing a specific armor, part upgrade, or forcing myself to play as Zero. I'll expound on this more when I get to the other sections to support this claim, but I implore you, dear viewer, that you keep this claim of mine in mind. Does this mean that the armors themselves are useless? Well, that actually depends on the armor we're talking about, and that is what I'm about to do. First up, the Falcon armor. Ah god, what did they do to you? So for those who don't know, the Falcon armor is one of those armors retained from X5. I'm not sure if this is a reference to how X5 starts you with the 4th armor from X4, but it's appreciated nonetheless. However, that's not to say that X6 retained the Falcon armor as is from the previous game. They made some changes that are both good and bad at the same time. Now I know what you might be thinking, reaction to changes done can be highly subjective, and you won't be able to successfully please anyone, and yes, you're right. However, the way I view the additions and removal of some of the Falcon armor's capabilities just further showcases how broken or badly designed the game can be. For example, the Falcon armor can now charge special weapons as it can in the previous game. It isn't a bad thing actually, more armors that can charge special weapons, the better. However, considering how stupidly questionable the way to unlock the other armors is, make this addition feel like a band-aid, especially since there are parts in the game that can only be done, if not easily done, with a charged special weapon shot. The next change they did with the Falcon armor is that they remove its capabilities to fly. For those who didn't know, this was the armor's main gimmick in X5. It was the only armor that can fly, and while flying, you can damage enemies you came into contact with. Plot-wise, Aelia couldn't fix the armor in time, so instead of flying, you instead do a quick air dash. This was, and still is, a very risky move since the developers just removed what is essentially a defining feature of this armor. Now I understand that they did this so as not to make the game unbelievably easy to play, but that doesn't mean squat when they decide to make this game frustratingly hard to play as X. There are other problems with the Falcon armor, such as its weak if not unreliable Buster Shot, and its really unreliable Giga Attack. To be fair, this has been a problem since X5, so I guess X6 gets a pass? The armor defense is really good though. Next is the ultimate armor. Sadly, this is going to be your only saving grace if you plan to play as X in this game. However, this doesn't mean that the ultimate armor is the end-all be-all. This only serves as a band-aid for possible X players, since as I've said earlier, the game for some reason was designed to not cater to X. Going back, luckily nothing was changed from the Ultimate Armor's functionality or design since its debut in X4. The only thing changed is the palette of the armor from blue to black. Let me just point out that it says a lot about a game's design if the secret cheat code armor isn't the easy solution to a player's problem. Let's now talk about the new armor, starting with the blade armor. This is the armor that players will most likely unlock first just because of how easy it is to get the armor parts. The blade armor, as the name implies, tries to focus on the Z-Saber, which X can use in X6. The problem is that it doesn't do the idea justice. It doesn't improve the base damage of the Z-Saber, nor does it make you swing the weapon faster. Instead, what they thought of was having an additional charged saber attack aside from the new charged Buster Shot, and a Giga Attack that uses the saber weapon to do a saber slash wave. Are they good? I honestly think that's up for debate. However, what I would like to point out is that if this was supposed to be an armor that focuses on the saber and mobility, then why doesn't it do that successfully? The only thing it got on lockdown was the mobility part because of the Mach Dash, which basically lets you cover more distance when you dash and allows you to dash in all 4 cardinal directions. If anything, this feels a little bit similar to the Falcon armor, except the Buster Shot is bigger and you can do some additional fancy moves with the Z-Saber. The point I want to make is that if you are going to do a power-up, whether it be an item pickup or in this case an armor, make sure that it does what it's intended to claim to do. Don't hesitate when trying to make something improve on a gameplay mechanic or functionality. In the case of the blade armor, it severely falls short in doing what it was set out to do, and instead looks like discount armor. The last armor to talk about is the shadow armor, and when I got this armor, I can't help but feel like the developers were trying to fulfill a checklist at this point. More on that later. The shadow armor, design-wise, is really cool because it makes X look and behave like a ninja. His normal Buster Shot is a bunch of shuriken-shaped projectiles that shoot out in 3 random directions, and the charge shot is a charged saber slash. The armor lets X swing the Z-Saber at a faster rate, and the Giga Attack lets you summon 2 crescent slashes that circle you, dealing damage to enemies nearby. For mobility, you can stick to walls, you have a hyper jump that lets you stick to ceilings, and you're also invulnerable to spikes. This is what I meant from my previous comment about the checklist. I say that because this isn't the first time the X series had an armor that could stick to walls and not die from spikes. I'm talking about the Gaia armor from X5. Considering the fact that the Gaia armor happened just a game ago makes the Shadow armor feel like a Mark II of the Gaia armor. To be fair to the Shadow armor, it is more mobile and has more fun capabilities than its predecessor. However, I can understand why the developers didn't think to double down on fixing some of the issues that made the Gaia armor a purely situational armor. For starters, the Shadow armor still can't use special weapons like the Gaia armor. This is a huge problem because there are points in the game where having a special weapon is mandatory to the progression of the game. Another issue that carried over was that the Shadow armor can air dash like the Gaia armor. Why? Why do this? The air dash is really crucial in making some of the platforming sections of the badly designed levels bearable. Not easy, bearable. Some of you might say that you can dash while on the ceiling and this is the way the armor compensates. But my counter argument to that is there won't always be a ceiling to stick to. Sometimes the design of the level involves a huge room or open area wherein a ceiling isn't present nor does it make sense. So how can it compensate for the lack of an air dash if levels lack a ceiling? Some of you might say it isn't the armor's fault, it's the level design, and I agree with you. However, I just point out that the developers should have thought of this more. If one of your armors can do something so fundamental or part of its main draw in a level, then the level should get redesigned so that regardless of which character you use, the level is playable from start to end. Or maybe redesign the armor so that it can be playable in every level. Everything in the game must be doable regardless of what you choose. I'm not saying it should be easy, I'm saying it should be possible. These are just one of the many inconsistencies of Megaman X6. I find it morbidly ironic that before you even start the game, there are already some issues that the player can experience. Plot and character aren't just parts of the game, but they are in fact key elements that help in setting up the foundation of a game. On paper, X6 has a lot of good ideas, however they failed in execution, making it seem like a half-baked job. In the next video, I'll be continuing the discussion of the gameplay mechanics for Megaman X6. However, we would be mostly focusing on the main gameplay feature, the main gimmick of this game, the nightmare phenomena, and all the other mechanics intertwined with this. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.